In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Jesus. Santa Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc and hora mortis nostrae. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday, January 20th, 2021, also known as Inauguration Day. It appears Trump has loaded up and left, gotten out of Dodge, left the White House, gave his farewell speech that was banned on most mainstream media, and a new era of communism in America has begun. So we have been warned about this. This shouldn't be a surprise. Our Lady has warned us, Our Lady of Fatima, that Russia would spread her errors throughout the world. What does that mean? Well, atheistic communism is what she was referring to. So, in light of that, I figured we might as well do some research and see just exactly what we have gotten ourselves into. So here we have the Library of Congress, Revelations from the Russian Archives. So I just want to read a little bit from the main points as far as the Bolshevik Revolution, what happens when Lenin took over and then eventually Stalin, and what exactly it will look like for us. I think it's going to be very similar, except there will be it'll be tweaked a little. So instead of like industrialization that they focus on, we're going to focus on green industrialization. So it's just communism 2.0 with same concept, different details. All right, so having come to power in October 1917 by means of a coup, Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks spent the next few years struggling to maintain their rule against widespread popular opposition. They had overthrown the provisional democratic government and were inherently hostile to any form of popular participation in politics. In the name of the revolutionary cause, they employed ruthless methods to suppress real or perceived political enemies. Wow, that doesn't that sound familiar? The small elite group of Bolshevik revolutionaries, which formed the core of the newly established Communist Party dictatorship ruled by decree, enforced with terror. So, a couple things that I want to point out right off the bat. The small elite group of Bolshevik revolutionaries. Now, the Bolshevik Revolution, the communist reign of terror, lasted for about 80 years, I think. It ended in the 80s, 1917 to 80s, so it's 70 something years. And it was not popular. A majority of the country didn't like it. So for everybody who has hope that, middle America and the silent majority, blah, 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 understand that it does not have to be the majority. I'm sure our Communist Party has more support than Vladimir Lenin did. Someone look up the numbers. You're going to see I'm right. So it doesn't take much. All it takes is a small, dedicated, motivated group to reign an entire country with terror. So the core of the newly established Communist Party dictatorship ruled by decree enforced with terror. The tradition of tight centralization with decision making concentrated at the highest party levels reached new dimensions under Joseph Stalin, as many of the archival documents below will show. There was little input from below. The party elites, wow, interesting word, determined the goals of the state and the means of achieving them in almost complete isolation from the people. They believed that the interests of the individual were to be sacrificed to those of the state, which was advancing a sacred social task. Isn't that the truth? Now, the sacred social task. Back then, it was industrialization, which they get into. Stalin's revolution from above sought to build socialism by means of forced collective collectivization, and industrialization, programs that entailed tremendous human suffering and loss of life. But now we're told it's in the name of social justice and equality and the Green New Deal, right? And you're a bad person. So our version of communism is almost worse. So rather than industrialization, it's you're actually morally bad if you don't go along with it, because who doesn't want a cleaner environment? Who doesn't want equality, right? So I guess they've progressively gotten smarter. Maybe they learned from the Bolsheviks what not to do. Although this tragic episode in Soviet history had at least some economic purpose, the police terror inflicted upon the party and the population in the 1930s, in which millions of innocent people perished, had no rationale beyond assuring Stalin's absolute dominance. Huh. Kind of seems that we might be there. I mean, there's 25,000 National Guard troops that were evidently vetted by the FBI that are in the Capitol right now. Sure seems to me like the left is flexing their muscles, doesn't it? By the time the Great Terror ended, Stalin had subjected all aspects of Soviet society to strict party state control. Pay attention. Not tolerating even the slightest expression of local initiative, let alone political unorthodoxy. The Stalinist leadership felt especially threatened by the intelligentsia, whose creative efforts were thwarted through the strictest censorship by religious groups who were persecuted and driven underground. So all you people who think, oh, the church will be fine, and by non-Russian nationalities, many of whom were deported en masse to Serbia during World War II because Stalin questioned their loyalty. Although Stalin's successors also persecuted writers and dissidents, they used police terror more sparingly to coerce the population, and they sought to gain some popular support by relaxing political controls and introducing economic incentives. Nonetheless, strict centralization continued and eventually led to the economic decline, inefficiency, and apathy that characterized the 70s and 80s and contributed to the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Mikhail Gorbachev's program of Perestroika was a reaction to the situation, but its success was limited by his reluctance to abolish the bastions of Soviet power, the party, the police, the centralized economic system. So those are the. Why do you think they were calling to defund the police? Well, I'll tell you why. Because most of the police are patriots. So it's not that they wanted to defund the police, they wanted to rebuild their own version of the police, which would be loyal to their party, which is why we see the National Guard being vetted. But those are key. So the party, the police, and the centralized economic system. All right, and then it finally ended because of a coup in August of 91. Right, so actually, yeah, the 90s is when it ended. By that time, however, it was too late to hold either the communist leadership or the Soviet Union together. After 74 years of existence, the Soviet system crumbled. So, I mean, I quite frequently talk about how we need to start thinking more long term. There is no quick fix to this, at least in the natural sphere. And then we have key points that characterize the communist regime: repression and terror, when Stalin was in control, repression and terror, Kirov murder and purges, the secret police, the gulag, collectivization and industrialization, anti-religious campaigns, attacks on intelligentsia, early attacks and renewed attacks, censorship, suppressing dissidents, Ukraine famine, deportations, the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, Chernobyl, and Perestroika. So as you can see, we're in for some fun. Repression and terror. During the second half of the 20s, Joseph Stalin set the stage for gaining absolute power by employing police repression against opposition elements within the Communist Party. And it's so funny. They always like infight and turn on themselves, right? Because that's what evil does, it implodes. The machinery of coercion had previously been used only against opponents of Bolshevism, not against party members themselves. The first victims were Politburo members Leon Trotsky and a bunch of other ones who were defeated and expelled from the party in 27. Stalin then turned against Nikolai Bukharin, who was denounced as a right opposition for opposing his policy of forced collectivization and rapid industrialization at the expense of the peasantry. So listen up, peasants. Stalin had eliminated all likely potential opposition to his leadership by late 1934 and was the unchallenged leader of both party and state. Nevertheless, he proceeded to purge the party, rank and file, and to terrorize the entire country with widespread arrests and executions. During the ensuing Great Terror, which included the notorious show trials of Stalin's former Bolshevik opponents, and reached between 1936 and 38 and reached its peak in 37. In 38, millions of innocent Soviet citizens were sent off to labor camps or killed in prison. By the time the terror subsided in 1939, Stalin had managed to bring both the party and the public to a state of complete submission to his rule. So it didn't take very long, did it? Soviet society was so atomized and the people so fearful of reprisals that mass arrests were no longer necessary. Stalin ruled as absolute dictator of the Soviet Union throughout World War II and until his death in March of 1953. So, let's take this as a lesson for all you Q people talking about there's going to be mass arrests in the government. No. Well, maybe, but on our side. They're going to purge the government of any political dissidents, and they're going to arrest patriots en masse. There's going to be a reign of terror in this country like one has never seen before. And they're taking it right out of of communist Russia. Okay, so we're the ones who are going to be arrested. I have news for you. That's just how it works. And then eventually, once the general population sees that if you speak out on social media, you're getting arrested, then they will eventually comply. So that's how this is going to go down. Repression and terror. Kirov murder and purges. The murder of Sergei Kirov on December 1st, 1934 set off a chain of events that culminated in the Great Terror of the 1930s. Kirov was a full member of the ruling Politburo, leader of the Leningrad Party apparatus, and an influential member of the ruling elite. His concern for the welfare of the workers in Leningrad and his skill as an orator had earned him considerable popularity. Some party members had even approached him secretly with the proposal that he take over as general secretary. It is doubtful that Kirov represented an immediate threat to Stalin's predominance, but he did disagree with some of Stalin's policies, and Stalin had begun to doubt the loyalty of members of the Leningrad apparatus. In need of a pretext for launching a broad purge, Stalin evidently decided that murdering Kirov would be expedient. The murder was carried out by a young assassin named Leonid Nekhluyev. Recent evidence has indicated that Stalin and NKVD planned the crime. He then used the murder as an excuse for introducing draconian laws against political crime and for conducting a witch hunt for alleged conspirators against Kirov. Sounds to me like a false flag. Over the next 4.5 years, millions of innocent party members and others were arrested, many of them for complicity in the vast plot that supposedly lay behind the killing of Kirov. From the Soviet point of view, his murder was probably the crime of the century because it paved the way for the Great Terror. Stalin never visited Leningrad again and directed one of his most vicious post-war purges against the city, Russia's historic window to the west. So they come up with these plots, then they use the results of the plots to inflict more draconian measures. We've seen that happening in America for a long time now, but it's going to be amplified and it's going to be against patriots. Secret police. From the beginning of their regime, the Bolsheviks relied on a strong secret or political police to buttress their rule. The first secret police called the Cheka was established in December of 1917. So very, very shortly after they took control. So that's something for us to watch for in the immediate days following the inauguration today. The original Cheka, headed by Falik, whatever, was empowered only to investigate counter revolutionary crimes, which is why they're paving the way with the insurgency at the Capitol, right? Okay, right. So I didn't realize a Capitol takeover was a bunch of weirdos going in there and taking selfies, but it doesn't matter because they've already set the narrative. So now they're going to have to institute some secret police type ordeal or just use the existing infrastructure to investigate counter revolutionary crimes, which they'll call domestic terrorists. Although many Bolsheviks viewed the Cheka with repugnance and spoke out against its excesses, its continued existence was seen as crucial to the survival of the new regime. So, regardless of if we agree with it or not, they don't care. That's the point. Um, so, it was eventually disbanded. The secret police remained the most powerful and feared Soviet institution throughout the Stalinist period, although the post-Stalin secret police, the KGB, no longer inflicted such large-scale purges, terror, and forced depopulation on the peoples of Soviet Union. Forced depopulation. It continued to be used by Kremlin leadership to suppress political and religious dissent. The head of the KGB was a key figure in resisting the democratization of the late 80s and organizing the attempted. All right. So let's see what else we got here. The Gulag. This is always a fun topic. The Soviet system of forced labor camps was first established in 1919, so a couple years after they took over, under the Cheka, but it was not until the early 30s that the camp population reached significant numbers. By 1934, the Gulag, or main direct Directorate for Corrective Labor Camps, sounds like re-education camps, then under the Cheka's successor organization, had several million inmates. Prisoners included murderers, thieves, and other common criminals, along with political and religious dissenters. The Gulag, whose camps were located mainly in remote regions of Serbia and the far north, made significant contributions to the Soviet economy in the period of Joseph Stalin. They constructed the White Sea Baltic Canal, the Moscow Volga Canal, and a bunch of other stuff. Stalin kept increasing the projects. Conditions were extremely harsh. Prisoners received inadequate food rations and insufficient clothing, which made it difficult to endure the severe weather and the long working hours. Sometimes the inmates were physically abused, and as a result, the death rate from exhaustion and disease in the camps was high. After Stalin died in 1953, the Gulag population was reduced significantly and conditions for inmates somewhat improved. Forced labor camps continued to exist, although on a small scale, into the Gorbachev period. And the government even opened some camps to scrutiny by journalists and human rights activists. Okay. Collectivization and industrialization. In November 1927, Stalin launched his revolution from above by setting two extraordinary goals for Soviet domestic policy: rapid industrialization and collectivization of agriculture. Oh boy. His aims were to erase all traces of capitalism that had entered under, check this out, the new economic policy. And that's actually the title of it. They're not just saying it's the new economic policy, and to transform the Soviet Union as quickly as possible without regard to cost into an industrialized and completely socialist state. So now we're seeing, instead of industrialization, we are seeing this green thing that's going to pop up. So everything has to be green, energy efficient and whatever, clean energy. Stalin's first 5-year plan, adopted by the party in 1928, called for rapid industrialization of the economy. You can just replace that with rapid greenness of the economy, with an emphasis on heavy industry. It set goals that were unrealistic, a 250% increase in overall industrial development, blah, blah, blah. It also called for transforming Soviet agriculture from predominantly individual farms into a system of large state collective farms. And that's what we're going to see, only we're going to see a tech aspect to it. Indoor grown food, fake meat, blah, blah, blah. The communist regime believed that the collectivization would improve agriculture productivity and would produce grain reserves sufficiently large to feed the growing urban labor force. The anticipated surplus was to pay for industrialization. Collectivization was further expected to free many peasants for industrial work in the cities and to enable the party to extend its political dominance over the remaining peasantry, right? So get people off the land and herd them into the cities. You control the food that way, and you control the, you have everybody in one place at that point. He focused particular hostility on the wealthier peasants. About 1 million kulak households were deported and never heard from again. Forced collectivization of the remaining peasants, which is often fiercely resisted, resulted in a disastrous disruption of agriculture productivity and a catastrophic famine from 1932 to 33. Although the first 5 year plan called for the collectivization of 20% of the peasant households, by 1940, 97% had been collectivized and private ownership of property almost entirely eliminated. Forced collectivization helped achieve Stalin's goal of rapid industrialization, but the human costs were incalculable. Yeah, okay. Anti-religious campaigns. Here we go. Now we're getting relevant here. The Soviet Union was the first state to have as an ideological objective the elimination of religion. And what we're going to see is you can keep your religion, but they're all the same. And the state is the ultimate God. Toward that end, the communist regime confiscated church property, ridiculed religion, harassed believers, and propagated atheism in the schools. We already have that going on. Actions toward particular religions, however, were determined by state interests, and most organized religions were never outlawed. The main target of the anti religious campaign in the 20s and 30s was the Russian Orthodox Church, which had the largest number of faithful. Nearly all of its clergy and many of its believers were shot or sent to labor camps. Theological schools were closed and church publications were prohibited. By 1939, only about 500 of over 50,000 churches remained open. Why? So they could see what goes on in them and make sure they're not preaching against the state like they do in China, right? After Nazi Germany's attacks on the Soviet Union in 41, Stalin revived the Russian Orthodox Church to intensify patriotic support for the war effort. So now he's just using religion for his own purposes. By 57, about 22,000 Russian Orthodox churches had become active, but in 1959, Nikita Khrushchev initiated his own campaign against the Russian Orthodox Church and forced the closure of about 12,000 churches. By 85, fewer than 7,000 churches remained active. Members of the church hierarchy were jailed or forced out of their places by docile clergy. Taken by docile clergy. Members of the church hierarchy were jailed or forced out, their places taken by docile clergy, many of whom had ties with the KGB. Sounds like the anti-church. Campaigns against other religions were closely associated, but the Russian Orthodox Church was the main target. Campaigns against, so check this out. Campaigns against other religions were closely associated with particular nationalities, especially if they recognized a foreign religious authority such as the Pope. By 1926, the Roman Catholic Church had no bishops left in the Soviet Union. And by 1941, only two of the almost 1,200 churches that had existed in 1917, mostly in Lithuania, was still active. The Ukrainian Catholic Church, linked with Ukrainian nationalism, was forcibly subordinated in 46 to the Russian Orthodox Church, so they tried to combine them to make them easier to control. Because you can't control a church who gets its authority, first of all, from God, but whose figurehead is foreign. But now we don't have that problem because our Pope is weak and he'll never actually stand up for us. So then it keeps going. Attacks on Judaism were endemic throughout the Soviet period, and the organized practice of Judaism became almost impossible. Protestant denominations and other sects were also persecuted. The All Union Council of Evangelical Christian Baptists, established by the government in 44, was forced to confine its activities to the narrow acts of worship and denied most opportunities for religious teaching and publication. Fearful of pan-Islamic movement, the Soviet regime suppressed Islam by force until 1941. The Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union that year led the government to adopt a policy of official toleration of Islam while actively encouraging atheism among Muslims. And then it goes on attacks on intelligentsia, and they were just a threat to their new regime. Suppression of the media was censorship was the main tactic. So we're already seeing that. The Bolshevik leadership sought rapidly to purge Russia of past leaders in order to build the future on a clean slate. Okay. Creative writers enjoyed great prestige in both the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union because of literature's unique role as a sounding board. But they obviously monitored it. Ukraine famine, deportations, Chernobyl. So yeah, it sounds like we're in for a whole lot of fun. So let's see what Biden has planned for us, because it sounds like a page out of the Soviet Union. I'm gonna pause this for a minute because there's one I found that was really good. All right, so I personally like this article. 25 nightmare things that will happen if Joe Biden wins the election, which is really Kamala Harris. So this is obviously before the cheating began. So let's see. Medical tyranny. Biden and his handlers will enact nationwide mandatory face mask rules and nationwide vaccine compliance rules. And in that, I mean, that could almost develop some sort of secret police type setting where now the contact tracers are turning people in for whatever, not what. I mean, the medical tyranny in and of itself is a whole tyranny. Those who refuse to comply will be banned from working, using public transportation, or appearing in public places. And that in and of itself will limit, it'll get everybody to do what they want and limit the amount of force needed. He will obviously pack the courts, and that's just getting their fellow commies in. He says Democrats will expand the number of U.S. Supreme Court justices to whatever number they need in order to achieve a liberal majority because Democrats always cheat. If they can't win by following the rules, they change the rules. Joe Biden currently says that voters will have to elect him first to find out if he's going to pack the court. Hint, yes, he is. Criminalizing climate deniers, right? So this is the industrialization that we saw. Only it's like climate industrialization. So-called climate deniers will be criminalized, and any who deny the climate change narrative in their online posts or speech will be arrested, prosecuted, and imprisoned under President Kamala Harris, who has openly promised to do exactly this. And then there's a link to that source of when she openly promised to do that. Medical dictatorship kind of goes along the same lines. Endless lockdowns, prisoner in your own home, right? Who needs the gulags when we're locked up in our own homes anyway? He did promise to, on day one, institute some 100-day mask nonsense. Like, we all aren't already wearing masks anyway. It's just them flexing their muscles. So this will be used to utterly crush the middle class, right? So the collectivization of the peasants and end any constitutional freedoms remaining in America. Force us all where they want us. Defunding the police. Police departments will be defunded nationwide, leading to a collapse in the rule of law across every major U.S. city. They want to replace cops with criminals, and I disagree with him here. What they want to do is replace the cops with their own people, probably private corporations, private security that aren't held and bound by the Constitution, would be my guess. Reversing Trump era court nominees. Joe Biden is already claiming that an appointment of Amy Barrett to the court is somehow unconstitutional, and Democrats are now absurdly claiming that Trump is packing the court in an illegal way. Okay. Number 7, nationwide bans on all AR-15s and similar semi-automatic firearms, and that's so they can control us and do whatever they want to us. Kamala Harris has already promised that she will use executive orders powers to ban all AR-15s in the first 100 days of her presidency. This would instantly turn tens of millions of Americans into criminal felons if they don't agree. And according to Joe Biden, he's coming after the AR-14s, so we're safe for now, guys. Number 8, Green New collapse, and this is the industrial part of it. Under a Biden presidency, the Green New Deal becomes law, banning all combustion engines and obliterating affordable travel, which we won't be able to do anyway without a vaccine. Rolling blackouts as the power grid fails. We will see coal-fired power plants shuttered and natural gas plants taken offline, resulting in rolling blackouts and grid failures. Yes, I disagree with the fact that we're going to see large-scale blackouts or a grid down scenario. Maybe to the red states we will, but here's the thing. The elites, the controlling force need the grid. They need the grid for their military. They need, you know what I mean? So I don't see them really, at least not completely annihilating the grid. Number 10, agricultural collapse leads to mass famine. We already know that's coming. The end of free speech, that already happens. Investigations into deep state traders are scuttled. Ending the Senate filibuster. Huge increases in taxes on the working class. I've talked to people who said their taxes have already increased. Surrendering to communist China, obviously. I mean, it is a communist China takeover, really. Banning ghost guns nationwide, that's already started. They seized Polymer 80s databases, so now they know everybody who has bought lower receivers from them. Reparations for blacks, outlawing all private health care insurance, federal bailout of democratic cities and states, rise of the thought police. We already see that with a 25,000 National Guard presence in the capital to flex their muscles, force low-income housing in suburbs. Right, the point is to collapse the suburbs and make everything a giant city where they have control. Door-to-door purges of Christians and conservatives, maybe. Once the left-wing militants, Antifa, BLM, government thought police are fully developed across the nation, they will launch a door-to-door purge campaign to hunt down and execute any remaining individuals who are Trump supporters, Christians, conservatives, or constitutionalists. No such people can be allowed to maintain in the society of the left cult. LGBT indoctrination of children and legalized pedophilia nationwide. I absolutely see that happening. The national voting age will be lowered to 14. That's an interesting concept. The outlawing of Christianity and the government burning down of all Christian churches nationwide. It'll be more of do what we say. This is what you push. You speak out against it. You get shut down. So needless to say, we are in for some fun. It's going to be a fun 4 years. And this isn't to scare anyone, but again, we need to face the music and figure out what we're dealing with. And until we do that, there will be no solution. And there really isn't a solution. We've been given the solution. Prayer, fasting, consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And if we don't do that, which we didn't, nations will be annihilated, and in the end, her Immaculate Heart will triumph. So apparently we're at the nations will be annihilated part, because here we are. Rest in peace, America. Joan of Arc Media out.